Testing? Okay, there we go. It's an old Johnny Carson gag for you guys there. So now, welcome. Thank you guys so much for coming. This is the first talk, and we're hoping is going to be a series of talks with the Indigenous nations. Some quick etiquette, so that way you guys know for the future, anytime there's an Indigenous talk, the Indigenous speaker will let you know if it's okay to videotape or take pictures. I think there is a zero cell phone clause here, but it is okay to kind of take note of anything. Also, as far as Indigenous, we are being sensitive to a lot of the cultures. I don't know if there's too many Indigenous people currently in this group, but we will be having images of an eclipse. Not an actual eclipse, but Indigenous representations of an eclipse. So we will have a short intermission for anybody who wishes to step out. And then when the eclipse images are wrapped, we will let everybody back in. But we will have an intermission. So those of you guys who want to take a quick restroom break, you're in luck. That said, Anit Anat Itsiakik, Joshua Ballze. I am Joshua Ballze. That is my native tongue that you just heard. I am from the O'odham nations, specifically the Hia-Ced O'Odham. We are one of over 20 local Indigenous nations here in the Southwest, just in the state of Arizona. So that doesn't even encompass the entire Southwest. We have over 20 nations that are here just in this state. So the subject we're going to be talking about, as you can see, are the Indigenous Skies. We're going to be talking about space travel and paleoastronomy. So real fast, show of hands, how many people knew that there were Indigenous people that were astronauts? Pretty good, pretty good. We got a few. How many people knew that there are still Indigenous people working at NASA to this day? Very good, very good. I'm hopeful. This is going to be a good crowd. So what you're seeing here is an official poster that was released by NASA of all the current Indigenous people that are in just one group, one specific study they did. This probably doesn't even count all of the Indigenous people that are currently working at NASA. But this is a public poster that they released. So right there. Each of those photos is a current employee that is currently at NASA working to make our dreams to the heavens all that much more real. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the astronomers first, and then we're going to go into more of the specific people that are currently working at NASA. One of the current astronauts is Nicole Mann. She is from the Walakai Nations. She was currently the astronaut mission commander. In fact, she was one of the first mission commanders that was a woman for the SpaceX, specifically the Dragon 5 crew. Nicole is from the Round Valley Indian Nations. That is a part of Dragon Crew 5, which launched on October 5th, 2022. So she just came from space like last year. She's probably the most recent Indigenous astronaut. She is credited with being the first Indigenous woman in space and being the first woman mission commander of the SpaceX program, which we just briefly talked about. The next Indigenous astronaut we have is probably the most well-known Indigenous astronaut. That is John Harrington. He's from the Chickasaw Nation. He was the astronaut for the International Space Station mission, STS-113. Harrington would complete a total of 3 spacewalks, so he was actually in the suit, out in space, doing the spacewalk, trying not to get blown out into the great void. And this totals over 19 hours and 55 minutes out in space. He was out in the suit, outside of the comfort of a space station for over 19 hours. I barely get, cabin fever driving 6 hours from here to Quartzsite and other places. So I can't imagine what it is to be 19 hours out in the void of space. So good on John. The next astronaut we're going to talk about is William Prough. He is from the Choctaw Nation. He was an astronaut for Skylab mission SLM-3. During the mission, Prough would log in over 2,000 hours in space flight. So he was flying for almost 2,000 hours as both the pilot for the Skylab 4 missions and 2 orbital EVAs. So he was out in orbit. Prough would also act as a support crew for the Apollo missions, though his only mission in space was during the Skylab mission. So for those who don't know, when you have a mission in space, if an astronaut comes down with a sickness or the flu and they have to go into quarantine, a support staff or support crew is there to kind of fill their spot if anything happens to an astronaut when they're so close to kind of taking off for their mission. Prior to his career with NASA, Pro would also be a part of the United States Air Force Thunderbird Squadron from 1955 to 1957. The Thunderbird is also an indigenous creature and is specific to the Southwest nations. Finally, we have Mary Golda Ross. She's from the Cherokee Nations. She's the first female engineer for Lockheed and the Skunk Works and Agena rocket project. So basically what that means is she got to do a lot of cool stuff to develop a lot of the rocket technology that got us into space. Mary Ross was instrumental to the Agena rocket project, which helped with the Gemini missions for manned space exploration. Mary's work in hydrodynamics would also make flyby missions to Venus and Mars possible. So our current rovers that are on Mars owe a big debt of gratitude to Mary. Mary's involvement in Skunk Works also involves design concepts for interplanetary space travel, and full extent of her work is still classified. Because of her work in Skunk Works, a lot of her work is still classified by the United States government. So we don't even know how much we can credit to Mary and her contributions to space travel. So this poster is the same poster you guys saw in the beginning, but each one of those names is a current person working right now at NASA. Be it JPL, be it the research program, be it their laboratory programs. There is over, I believe, 21 people just in this poster, and even then we don't know if that is the total amount of indigenous people that are currently working on space programs to this day. So of these people we have representatives of the Dene, which is also known as the Navajo. We have representatives of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. We have representatives of the Cherokee. We have representatives of the Pueblo Laguna or New Mexico nations. We have quite a few nations that are represented just in this poster. That is how pivotal the indigenous people have been to space travel to this day. One of the most notable people we do want to credit is this guy right on the top, Aaron Yazzie, who's from the Dene or the Navajo. He works at JPL. He is one of the people that developed the Perseverance rover. So who knows about the Perseverance rover? Very cool. So the Perseverance rover, of course, for those of you who don't know, is currently on Mars looking for proof of life on another planet. So he was instrumental to this program. This is the Perseverance rover right here. And then, of course, the rock formations, and along with helping with constructing this giant machine, which is huge. This looks deceptively small, but it's probably a little bigger than a Volkswagen. And this big machine that's looking for life is currently on Mars in the Jezero crater. And what's really cool about this is as they're finding formations on Mars, they're actually naming them after indigenous words or indigenous names. In fact, you can see some of the names right here. And they're translations. I'm not Dene, so I will not trouble to botch the names that we see up there, but they sound very indigenous, I can assure you. So along with this rover was a really cool perk. And I don't know if any of you know about the ticket to Mars. Did anybody here get a ticket to Mars during the Perseverance rover? No, nobody knows about that. So something that's really cool about the Perseverance rover, this plate that was attached to the rover actually holds 3 microchips. On each of those microchips includes someone's name. So what NASA did was you could fill in an interplanetary boarding pass. And that boarding pass then got your name onto one of these microchips. And then your name would then be flown to Mars. I am technically a Martian. So this is my interplanetary boarding pass. As you can see, I have boarded when the rover took off. I have earned over 313 million miles, points awarded. I hope I can cash those in pretty soon to a nice comfy trip to Aruba. But it's really cool, the flight departure. We departed July 2020, Jezero Crater. The rocket was the Atlas 5 and 547 technically. And the launch site was Cape Canaveral, right here on Earth. So this is a really cool perk, and it kind of highlights that me as an indigenous person got my name on an indigenous rover that then took a rocket to Mars and is currently looking for life on the red planet. How cool is that? So I don't have any fellow Martians here, but we can cut to some quick footage of what the Perseverance rover is currently looking at in Mars. So what you're seeing here is a panoramic view of Mars. This is live from the Perseverance rover, not live right now, but live when it was broadcasted. So these are all the Martian rocks that we're looking at, just to try to get an inkling, a slight hint of life on the red planet. And what's cool is not only is this mission really integral, but when the Mars rover finally powers down, my name will be on that rover as kind of a permanent, like, staple on the red planet. Like, oh, hey, did you find the Perseverance rover? FYI, my name is on there. How cool is that? Heads up, I do believe NASA is planning another trip to Mars, and you can actively put your names on that satellite as well. So if you guys want to get your name on Mars, feel free to check it out on NASA. That said, we are coming to the halfway point of our talk, so we will be taking a quick 3 to 4 minute intermission for anybody that wants to use the restroom or is not wanting to stick around for the eclipse iconography, so we're going to be taking a quick 3-minute break. That said, we welcome you back when we get back to the rest of our Indigenous talk. And if we have no bathroom breaks, we'll just jump right into it. I feel like everybody here is comfortable with eclipses, I want to say. Is everybody here good with eclipses? Okay, all right, let's just jump into the next subject. I like this crowd. You guys are my favorites so far. Oh, we might have one taker. Okay, we'll humbly wait for that real fast. But yeah, no, this is a real thing. This is a real boarding pass. I did get it laminated and cut out. It is sitting on a frame on my mantle. I'm very proud of it. And then anybody that does say they did the boarding pass, we kind of have an active joke, like we'll go over our plans to take over Earth at a later time. So far, I've visited very few Martians here in Prescott, so you guys are lucky. You're full of Earthlings. Congratulations. So all right, I think you're back. Okay, cool. So we're going to go ahead and go to eclipse iconography. So we're going to jump from contemporary space travel into prehistoric astronomy. What we have here is a painted cave from the Chumash. These are known as pictographs. So those of you who don't know, petroglyphs are carved into the rocks. Pictographs are painted into the rocks. These sadly have suffered from heavy amounts of vandalism. As you can see, there's initials that have been carved into a majority of them. These are not indigenous anything. These are just initials that people kind of deface these sites. So these sites are heavily protected now. And this happened much earlier in our history, roughly in 1930s, 1940s. But what makes these very notable is that they are credited to depict what's known as a solar eclipse or star iconography. So each of these is technically a sun symbol or a star symbol. And pretty much it's consistent with the history that the solar eclipse that it occurred on, that this is credited to, happened in November 24th, 1677. So in 1677, there was an eclipse event, and they credit these specific pictographs with depicting that event. So we have a larger image, and you can see in more detail a lot of these sunspots, a lot of these circular symbols. A lot of people mistaken these crosses for Judeo-Christendom in terms of the missionary programs that came over during colonization. A lot of these symbols actually date much, much older, before first contact, which, does anybody know what first contact is? Okay, a few people. First contact is when Spain first touched down here in North America, roughly around 1500 AD. So these predate the Spanish exploration of North America and the Americas overall. A lot of these pictographs are actually very, very unique, and they, as soon as you say star, they look more and more like stars and suns and even certain celestial phenomena. This one specific is currently protected, and a lot of these pictographs, their locations are being kept under wraps because we want to make sure that they are not inebriated with heavy tourism. Sadly, it is tourism that is vandalizing a lot of these sites. Tourists come, they see things, nobody's looking, they'll start carving their names into the rock art, and over a large period of time, the rock art just gets completely destroyed. We're actually very lucky to see these that have still survived to this day. One of the coolest things we have right here is this petroglyph. This petroglyph looks pretty weird. It's a circle with a bunch of squigglies. Anybody want to guess what those squigglies are? Ah, we got pretty close. We got someone here. So these are technically coronal mass ejections. They're the arcs of plasma that you see around the sun. The sun is actually very, very active, and it has these arcs. Now, somebody presented to me with a very interesting question. How do we know this is an eclipse event when you can just kind of draw a sun with these mass ejections? And I humbly retorted with, well, you can't look at the sun without going blind. So in order to see this kind of activity on the sun, you need to look at the sun during an eclipse event. In fact, we just recently had a ring of fire eclipse where it was a partial eclipse, but you could still see the ring of the sun around the eclipse event, which was really cool. So this specific petroglyph is possibly dating to 1097. That's when they want to presume that this eclipse event happened. This is based on calculations of the orbit of the moon and Earth. The citation is from Melville, and he notes that the total eclipse was visible in Chaco Canyon, which is where this petroglyph is from, somewhere around July 11th, 1097. So that's 1097 AD. Around the height of the area's development. To prove this hypothesis, Melvin collaborated with astrophysicist Jose, who specializes in reconstructing the solar activity of the past using evidence left behind on Earth. As unlikely as it sounds, the method in which they used to calculate this solar event was trees. They used trees to calculate when this solar eclipse happened. So to go into further detail, when the sun's ray strikes in the atoms of the Earth's atmosphere, they can create radioactive molecules called radionuclides, including the radiocarbon used to dating organic materials. This is the radiocarbon dating method that we hear about all the time at museums. The radioactive molecules get bound up in living matter like trees. By analyzing how much radiocarbon is left in sampling of tree rings dating back to a certain year, science can extrapolate how much energy the sun was shooting towards the Earth's atmosphere at one time as it is absorbed by the organic matter on Earth. The analysis found that the sun reached a maximum of activity in its cycle of magnetic activity in 1098 AD, just 1 year before the Chaco Canyon eclipse. So that means the sun was getting super active when the eclipse event happened, and it was shooting these radionuclides at Earth. And then shortly after that, we have this awesome petroglyph. And then if we go to the planetarium, we'll have a really cool video of what a mass ejection looks like. So if you look right here, you'll see that big arc right there. That is a coronal mass ejection. That is the arcing of plasma shooting out into space, but it forms these beautiful rings that are still visible. In fact, some of the most recent eclipse events, if you look through your telescope, you can actually see many arcs and mass ejections go out into the atmosphere. So with that visual, you kind of see as we go back to the slide, and then there's another coronal ejection right there. It's beautiful. I could watch this all day, but I'm not. So as you can see, when we go back to this petroglyph, those squiggly lines make a lot more sense. They actually note this activity on the sun on a petroglyph dating back to roughly 1098 to 1097 AD, which when you think about it is pretty phenomenal because it's one of very few coronal mass ejection petroglyphs that we have record of here in the Southwest. One of the other things that we have are contemporary representations of eclipses. This is an eclipse with a crown dancer ceremony happening. This is a painting done by Yavapai Apache artist Gordon Lewis. He comes from the Yavapai Apache Nation. The painting depicts what's known as a crown dance ceremony. This particular ceremony is depicted happening during the solar eclipse. But the crown dancers themselves also hold celestial meaning, one having the symbol of the North Star on his chest. So that is actually the North Star that is represented by that crown dancer. So this ends our eclipse representation. We are now going to go on to something cool, supernovas. So this is a possible supernova petroglyph that is found in Baja, California. This is possibly dating to 1054 AD. The pictograph is theorized to depict the light of the supernova that formed the Crab Nebula. The light of this event is estimated to have reached Earth around 1054 AD. The pictograph is located in Baja, California, and is credited to the indigenous Cochimi culture or an earlier ancestral culture. So that means it might belong to a paleo-indigenous culture. The nearby archaeological findings also associate the mural to the Kamandu Cultural Complex that's down in Baja, California. So before we get to some of the cool stuff we have here, we're going to demonstrate to you what a supernova looks like. That should be fun. So as you see right here, you see a little ball of mass, and all of a sudden, it decides to explode. And we get a supernova. Now, this specific supernova, as we related earlier, is credited to the Crab Nebula. So that is the specific nebula and supernova event that is credited to be depicted in Baja, California. So if we can show you guys a picture of the Crab Nebula real fast. It's one of my favorite nebulas, in fact. But this is the Crab Nebula that is being depicted in Baja, California. So this supernova event, it's a somewhat circular nebula. It's one of the more well-known nebulas. And this mass explosion would have reached Earth, and inhabitants would have witnessed this event with the skies getting brighter and then darkening. All these kind of weird celestial-like things are happening in the sky. So if we go back to the slideshow real fast, to the next slide. This doesn't look like much. In fact, it looks very blurry. But with my background in scientific illustration, what I was able to do is do a cleanup job. And you can see the petroglyph, or specifically the pictograph, a little bit more cleaner. So what we're seeing here is a depiction of what's likely the sun. This is that explosion event, and we have this line in the middle noting that there was some kind of eclipse or disruption that happened in the sky during this particular event. This is another publication noting that the supernova pictograph, what it actually is active in El Parral, Baja, California. It's side by side with our reconstruction. So you can see that we use scientific analysis and peer-reviewed papers to do our reconstructions when it comes to these types of pictographs. This is not the only pictograph, however, that's associated with a supernova event. These pictographs that are found in multiple areas, Chalco Canyon, New Mexico, Navajo Canyon, Arizona, White Mesa, Arizona, Baja, California, each of these has been associated with a supernova, specifically the supernova that formed the Crab Nebula. But this one specifically is interesting because the same supernova pictographs that are in Chaco Canyon are actually right below what is known as a comet pictograph. Comet pictographs are a little bit more rare. We don't find them that often. This specific pictograph is credited to be of Halley's Comet. So for those of you who don't know Halley's Comet, which I'm sure everybody does, we do have some images of Halley's Comet and some comet activity. So if we go to the Planetarium, this is a photograph of Halley's Comet. This was taken back in the 80s, but it remains, I think, one of the most clear photographs of the actual comet with the comet's tail. And then we have another video of a comet and what the tail does. So this was video of a comet going close to the sun, and its entire tail was eaten as it shot out of the top of the sun right there. So if you pay attention, it'll come right here. That's the actual comet, and then it shoots out right there. So its tail was eaten by the gravity of the sun. It's a pretty cool thing. So if we go back to our slideshow. This is what the comet pictograph looks like currently. It doesn't look like much. It doesn't look very impressive. What happens is a lot of these pictographs are subjected to the elements weather, exposure, a lot of this kind of dries away and kind of eats away at these pictographs. In fact, right here, what these little sections are actually birds' nests that have to be cleared out on a regular basis just so these existing pictographs can remain in one piece. But again, what we did, and this is the first time anybody's seeing this, we did a reconstruction of the comet pictograph. This is one of the first attempts, I believe, of doing a digital reconstruction of the Halley Comet pictograph from Chaco Canyon. And you guys are actually some of the first people to see it. So congratulations. Hopefully that was worth the price of admission. So what else do comets and meteors represent to indigenous people? Well, one of the cooler stories revolving around comets and meteors are those of Sky Panther. How many people knew that indigenous people had dragon stories? We got one or two. This crowd continues to impress me. So this is known as the Sky Panther. It is a chimera of all different things that represents a very volatile entity. The Sky Panther is a composite. It has feet with claws, so it has power over the land. It has wings, so it has power over the sky. It has a long tail with a fish tail, so it has power over the water. It has a crown of antlers because the deer, ironically, is considered the king of the forest. So by putting antlers on this dragon, it is being noted as the king of its realm. This is probably as close to a monster as you can get within a lot of our stories. The story of Sky Panther, this one specifically is prevalent in many indigenous nations. The Tuscarora call it Cahastenes. The Ojibwe call it Mississippi. In fact, the Mississippi River itself is credited to be a giant water panther whose tail is eating the entire Northern American continent. Other names are from the Sinagua, where it is called Gahastianeta, and then the Mohawk, which is Kahasianies. So these are all the different names that we have for Sky Panther. This pottery also depicts a Sky Panther, a composite dragon. This is the front of its face. This is the underneath pattern. That's actually underneath the bowl. Sky Panther is being associated with falling stars or meteors. The Sky Panther dwells in the deepest part of the underwater world because it burns so brightly. If someone saw a shooting star or a meteor, it was said that they saw the Sky Panther traveling in the sky. And what would happen is if the Sky Panther did not reach the next large body of water, it is theorized that the Earth would burst into flames. We think that this story comes from meteor impacts, which if you guys have been here in the Southwest, you have run into a lot of meteor crater theme parks and little sideshow attractions. Those are actual meteor impacts. And as a meteor touches down on Earth, it hits it with an explosion sometimes akin to a nuclear bomb. So as you can imagine, the indigenous people found this entity to perfectly depict that specific event. These are also what's known as copper engravings of specific Sky Panthers. This one is a current one. It's from Hia-Ced, Tennessee. It is credited with the mound builder culture, and it actually has a meteor pattern that is right across the eyes right here. This is another one. It's a little bit scarier. Also made of copper. This one's from Georgia, also affiliated with the mound builder culture. This one's a little bit more complete, so you can see the mouth right here. You can see the nose, the two eyes, and that similar meteor pattern that's right there. However, not all meteors are scary to all indigenous nations. This is actually a personal photo that I took because it's the holidays. It's December 1st, and this photo is my photo of the Christmas star that happened just a few years ago. And as I was photographing the Christmas star, a shooting star happened right below it. That's an actual photo I caught on accident. I just wanted to catch the star. I got a little lucky there. So other nations that depict meteors also are the Chumash. The Chumash, who we covered earlier, have meteor pictographs, which are very rare. These specific pictographs are cave art that is from Ventero territory. These were recorded by Campbell Grant. The citation is Grant, 1965. This is plate 25, where he notes these ones. However, every time I look into a book for these pictographs, I cannot find one. And then I got lucky. This is a Chumash painting of a meteor. As you can see, this is the meteor itself, and this is the tail of it. And the actual tail extends further and further down, and there's actual other depictions of meteors as well on this specific pictograph. But this one's really cool because they are very, very hard to find. Finally, one of the more fun stories comes from the chasing star Kachina. This is of the Hopi Nation. This is a famous artist here that's local. This is filmer Kawayama. This is his Instagram, if you guys want to follow him. A little shameless plug there. Because he was kind enough to give me permission to use this painting. This painting is of a chasing star Katsinam. The chasing star Katsinam are known as Nunakwasu, or the Nunakwasu Katsinam. They are associated with shooting stars and meteor showers, and if you look at the planetarium, we'll see a emulation of what's known as a meteor shower. So if you can imagine you're the Hopi, and you're looking up in the night sky, and all of a sudden you start seeing these objects just shooting at you. What they would say is these were the shooting star Katsinam, and they would chase each other in the sky. They were omens, and they would bring both good and pensive omens to the Hopi people. But if we cut back to the slideshow, this is the Katsinam that the Hopi said were shooting stars. Finally, we're going to get to our last subject, which is kind of the most extensive subject, star charts. The indigenous people did map the stars. We had star charts. This one is from the Chikiri Pawnee star chart. This artifact is currently at the Field Museum in Chicago. It looks like a star chart, but we can still see some notable star constellations. In fact, the next slide, we were able to identify the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, the North Star, the Corona Borealis, that is possibly Gemini, and a few other constellations here on the side. But if we actually look at the physical constellations that are in the skies, if you guys pay attention to the dome real fast, we can see that the constellations are in rough orientation. We have Gemini, we have Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper, Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, and the Corona Borealis. So these constellations are in the exact position as the star chart here, in the exact order. Now the orientation is a little different. Notably, the Corona Borealis is facing one way, it's facing this way, but it's a testament to the ingenuity of the indigenous people at the time that they were able to map these star charts with a certain percentage of accuracy. However, that's not the only star chart. What we have here is a Chumash star chart. Again, the Chumash loved space. They're one of my favorite nations to study. This is prehistoric cave pictographs from Southern California. This is known as Hia-Ced Cave. If you pay attention to this figure right here and this kind of dragonfly figure right here, the Chumash cave painting itself is massive. That picture was this little area right here. And as you can see, it notes certain constellations. There's Cassiopeia, there's Perseus, Pegasus, Andromeda. Over here we have Sagitta. And it took a little bit of finagling. Like, not a lot of people knew what they were looking at when they saw this. Like, how do you affiliate this pictograph with star charts? Well, if we look at it a little bit closer, we can fade, and it actually notes the constellations. Again, there we have Perseus, Cassiopeia, Pegasus, and Sagitta. So if we go back, Perseus, Cassiopeia, Pegasus, Sagitta. So that's some pretty good mapping, considering this is not on a flat piece of paper. This is on a cave, and a cave is not a flat artworking surface. You got to do a lot of compensation for every time a cave dips, curves, crevices. So for them to accurately map out this star system in such a way that if we actually look over here at the physical constellations, and we can actually fade away from the star chart, we actually get Orion, Gemini, Cassiopeia. Let me see, where is he? There's Sagitta, there's Lyra, there's Cygnus. This is in a rough, accurate mapping of this entire star constellation from this cave star chart that was found in somewhere random in Southern California. That is phenomenal if you really sit to think about it. That is a testament to the ingenuity of the indigenous people and how accurately they strove to map the star systems. So if we cut back to our slideshow, this isn't the only case of mapping stars. What we have here is a deer whistlebone. On the whistlebone itself, we have Cassiopeia that's mapped right there. So this is the same whistlebone. It's just showing you different sides and different beads. Notably, we have Orion right here as it's mapped out. There is a missing bead that they note. We have Pleiades. We have Cassiopeia. We have a lot of interesting things that are being noted here on this tiny little deer bone. Finally, we have a rough overlay of additional artifacts. So that's a shameless picture of me. This is here locally, but this is a very famous pictograph, specifically a petroglyph. We call it the saber-toothed petroglyph for obvious reasons, but this is not what we're highlighting. What we're highlighting is this guy right here. That is known as the Sinagua cross. The Sinagua are another paleo-indigenous culture that predates a lot of the indigenous people here. In fact, the current-day indigenous people came from the Sinagua culture. And this dates to between 500 and 1425 AD, again, before first contact. So before missionaries touched down in North America in 1500 AD, a lot of these pictographs were showing up. And a lot of people mistook those pictographs as Judeo-Christian crosses. They thought that they were a relic of the missionaries. What this actually depicts is the North Star, or the Venus star. Other artifacts are a star drum. This is from the Tarahumar Nation from northern Mexico. It is a six-sided star. And then one of the last artifacts we're going to cover is a solstice geoglyph calendar. This is one of the oldest artifacts that we're featuring. This is paleo-indigenous. According to the National Park Service, this dates possibly to as old as 500 BC. So a lot of the indigenous nations that hold this, and this is located in, I believe, Bighorn, Wyoming, note that this structure was there before they established their culture in that area, but they still use this site as a sacred site to this day. In fact, a lot of this national park site has been partially given to the indigenous people to keep, to kind of oversee, if anything, to stem vandalism. And what we're missing here is within each of these little circles, there would be a giant wood beam that would help align it with the horizon line. So really fast, we're going to do a quick visual of what the solstice is for people who don't know. So the solstice is roughly the cycle of the day and the night. Here we have the months of the year. What we have is the sun traveling. So this is the longest day. And as we get later in the year, October, the days are getting shorter and shorter. November, shorter and shorter. Right around December, we get to the shortest day of the year. And then January, we start going back up. Longest day. February, longest day. We have the March equinox, which is when the day and the night are equal. And then we get to our longest days, which are roughly in May, June, July, summer. It's a great time for kids. So if we cut back to the geoglyph itself, this is what it currently looks like, thanks to extensive preservation efforts by the National Park Service. And one of the questions we got asked is like, well, how do you know this is a solstice stone? This could be anything. You know, it's a circle, it's on the ground, it's huge, it's impressive. How do we know it's a solstice calendar? Because to this day, it still lines up with the sunset. Pretty cool, huh? So with that said, we get to the end of our talk. I want to do a special thanks to Eric Edelman here at the Planetarium, Phil Kawaminya, I botched his name, I'm sure he'll forgive me, Andy Christensen, Lisa Anderson, and the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So that said, we get to the end of Indigenous Skies. Oh, we faded, but if you guys want to follow me, there are some of my handles.